Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Seek, and I'm Senior Director of Enablement at Outreach. If you're not familiar, Outreach is a leader in sales engagement space and focused on driving efficiency by helping sellers humanize their customer communication approach at scale. I'm excited to talk to you today about consultative enablement and how to have a multiplier effect by enacting consulting strategies. So why is this topic so important? Well, to me, enablement is an investment in maximizing human potential at scale. And so the topic of consultative enablement is important today, probably more than ever, because we're having to justify the investment by clarifying our impact. Too often, I see my industry peers try to make the leap in saying something like, the team liked my training, and moving it all the way to it had X impact on bottom line for the quarter or for the year. And that's a bold statement, my friends. So I'm excited to show you today how to connect the dots and to clarify enablement's role in the sales team's success. It's similar to how a management consulting firm can justify high prices by utilizing repeatable exercises, models, project plans, and templates to help their consultants be successful in working with diverse clients. And you may be wondering, why am I the person to talk about this? Well, while I've spent my career admiring management consulting firms, I've actually had the opportunity to work in a center of excellence at a large enterprise organization, getting certified in Lean Six Sigma for process improvement, as well as achieving my CPTD, or Certified Professional in Talent Development. This has given me access to the tools, the templates, the resources, and those proven frameworks so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm excited to share those with you today. So in this session, we will cover how enablement is a strategic function. For the teams that I've led in the SaaS startup space, I've positioned our small but mighty group to be an internal consulting firm with the sales org as our internal customers. This has created a mindset shift to focus on high priority items where it's valuable to measure the impact. Throughout my career, 2 talent development frameworks have really resonated with me, and I've adjusted them and educated internal stakeholders on these processes to form a true partnership. Those models are the ATD model and the Kirkpatrick model. And we'll go in depth on what these frameworks' original intent are, and we'll walk through specific examples of how to implement them as an internal process for your sales enablement team. So let's get started. There's a debate right now in our industry on how strategic our function can actually be within an organization. It stems from the challenge that we may always have to balance tactical and strategical elements. The collaborative nature of the partnership with enablement, though, should absolutely be viewed at a strategic level in order to escape reactive dominance of constantly chasing the next shiny object. Too often, enablement and operations are lumped into a category of supporting the sales org. One of the first things that I do when starting or taking over a team is create that mindset shift of being a strategic partner, which means we first eliminate the term support from our vocabulary. When I hear support regarding enablement, this is what it reminds me of. Requests for training and enablement are more reactive in nature and are usually at the whim of sales management or even vocal sellers. So if you've ever heard the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, I think this is a good example of that. Oftentimes, these requests are more emotional in nature due to recency effect or personal coaching challenges, where training just sounds like it's the easiest solution. This creates a constant mode for the enablement team to try to just keep their head above water. But in that effort, there's not sufficient time to plan. So each rollout becomes this unique snowflake of a plan where content ends up being just good enough versus closer to what you know your ideal state could be. This lack of rhythm doesn't account for measuring impact, because before one initiative is completely done, the enablement team has already started on the next task to tackle. This makes it challenging to quantify the return on effort, which in turn makes it understandable when leaders feel skeptical about the value. But if we look at it from another angle, if we look at it from the way that things could be, the grass appears a lot greener. So imagine this. You now have a clear roadmap of priority initiatives and know that the work you're doing is most important to driving success. Not only do you know what to do, but you have partners in the business who understand their roles and responsibilities in ensuring that those initiatives are adopted. And while it's great that sales leaders know their role, they also begin to develop muscle memory and have expectations of how to successfully launch and change behaviors on their team. And best of all, you're invited to regularly present on progress, blockers, and celebrate the measurable impact that this partnership has created. So wouldn't you love to have that feeling at scale? Let's talk about how to get there. When I think of a small and mighty enablement team, I think about a multiplier effect, where limited input can generate outsized impact. What was once a financial term has translated really nicely to organizational impact at scale. And the concept remains true for knowledge transfer. If you want to learn more, there's 2 great general business leadership books that help to articulate the value of multipliers at scale. Now, this sounds great in theory, but it can also work in an opposite direction if not implemented well. So let's walk through an example of that. The ideal state is that your entire target audience attends your training and finds it so valuable and so relevant that they're passionate adopters of the behavior change that you were seeking to drive. Here, each grouping represents a different team, where M represents a team manager and S represents their reporting staff. In this scenario, ideal knowledge transfer is achieved through the training, coaching, and change management. But let's say one manager wasn't in alignment. And that manager makes some minor comment to their team, like, I know that's what was said in training, but don't worry, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure we can all think of an initiative where there's been a detractor in the group who's had a negative multiplier effect. And as you see here, this manager's team no longer is being held accountable to the changes. And so they've reverted back to doing things their old way. But salespeople especially, like to talk. So it doesn't just stop there. The negative impact can spread like wildfires. Reps talk to each other even when they aren't on the same team. And that social learning element can be broken by vocal dissenting opinions. You can see that even though Team 3's manager was still a positive supporter of the initiative, they're now struggling to coach half of their team, which may in turn plant seeds of doubt in the right approach. Ultimately, enablement is a team sport. And this imagery is a representation similar to what my company uses to describe sales process efficiency. I just found that the image really resonated for what we're going through in enablement too. At Outreach, we say if your reps are confused, your customers are confused. And you can see on the left side, it feels really chaotic. Same with reactive enablement. Reps that aren't properly enabled can feel confused, and that has a downstream impact to your customers. Not only that, but workload prioritization for the actual enablement team is one of the top challenges that enablement leaders face. By implementing a few repeatable processes, you can get your enablement team and your business partners in the sales org aligned and moving fast towards achieving results. So let's explore those frameworks that I mentioned earlier and help provide some structure to the team, starting with ATD. To mitigate a negative impact, it's important to create a strong, repeatable process of checks and balances that generate confidence in the experience. The ATD model is a generic process typically used by instructional designers. It represents a dynamic, flexible guideline for effective training and performance support tools. At my first role within SaaS, or software as a service, I worked with the talent development team to modify the model to be fit for purpose for key initiatives and I've used it religiously with my teams ever since. So know that when I describe the model in this presentation, I'm describing how it's worked for my team, not necessarily the textbook version. So there may be some discrepancies. It's also important to reiterate that enablement is a team sport. You heard me say it once, I'll say it again. But before we dive into the framework, I want to call out that there are some crucial steps to ensure the right projects come enablement's way. First is your business's strategic annual planning process. By understanding the mission of your company for the short-term and for the long-term perspective, you'll have a great lens to look through when you're qualifying your projects. Now, even beyond that, beyond the company strategy, the sales team and cross-functional partners will outline their business priorities. So enablement needs to really be in the know on what each of these different teams is working on, because they'll be the bridge that connects the dots between them. Once you've got that understanding of the strategy for the organization, you can start to look through the lens of the ATD model. And so that begins with the analyze phase, leading into design, develop, implement, and evaluate. As most folks in this session are probably geared towards sales enablement specifically, I think it's crucial that we recognize similarities in our enablement process to the sales process. So you'll hear me start to make those connections as we go deeper into each of these 5 phases, starting with analyze. When I think of how analyze phase relates to the sales process, it's so similar to seller's discovery stage in the sales funnel. To that avail, sales leaders will often ask you to skip this step and get straight to work. But like discovery, this is the part of the process that sets every other phase up for success. I find that when you relate it to their sales process, sales leaders become a lot more understanding. Through your own intake process, whether as formal as an intake meeting or as casual as a quick conversation on the sales floor, you'll begin to assess and address the following. The problem statement. So, is this a challenge worth solving? And can it be solved by training, or is it really something else? Who will the target audience be? That's really important to determine if you're going to have any customization by segment or by role. Next, forming a sponsorship committee is another one of my keys to success. Enablement leverages multiple vantage points. So whether it's leaders, frontline managers, reps, cross-functional partners, even the customer point of view, it's important to have diverse representation to champion your initiative to be successful. Next is assessing the initiative against the project queue as it relates to urgency and value. So once you have a strong understanding of those competing business priorities, you really need to measure and constantly assess and reprioritize based on the requests coming through. Next is defining what good looks like by creating those baseline metrics and establishing goals. You really want to know how you're going to measure success of this program before you even get started. And then finally, understanding operational readiness. So do we have the systems and the processes in place to support this? Are we considering upstream and downstream impacts, defining those and socializing those? Once you've done your research, then it's time to start planning. So let's move to the next phase, which is design. In the design phase, this is where project management skills are crucial to any successful enablement manager. This phase is similar to creating a mutual action plan with prospects so that all parties have some skin in the game. In this phase, the team puts pen to paper around the learning objectives, what the seller will be able to say, do, or show as a result of the training. Based on those learning objectives, a plan of deliverables is drafted and proposed. It should consider diverse learning styles and levels of experience when determining the modality. A best practice is to work backwards with the end in mind to understand the true timeline and ensure stakeholders are properly identified to be involved. Now, this GIF or GIF that you see below is a visual of a manual project plan in Google Sheets. Your go-to-market team likely has a tool that can automate this collaborative process even further. Something like a Smartsheet or Asana, Monday.com, or Microsoft Project. Use what your teams are most familiar with if you want multiple parties to engage. And if they're not familiar with a tool that you're looking to implement, take the time to train your key stakeholders on the tool and the process to ensure confidence and participation. Next is moving to the develop phase. This is where content assets are being created, assembled, and piloted with managers and sales council representatives. So if we're relating this back to tech sales in particular, this could be where the customer gains access to a sandbox environment and verifies the relevance of the important use case. Frontline managers are the most important partner to driving knowledge retention and behavior change. And so it's important to invest in a preview of content so that managers can coach beyond the knowledge of the rep. If you think about it, it's not fair to give them the same level of exposure to the training and assume that they're 100% bought in and ready to combat objections from their team. So invest in extra tools that articulate ongoing accountability and what the managers are responsible for reinforcing and inspecting. I like to create manager playbooks or toolkits associated with these important initiatives so that managers feel they have exactly what they need to be successful. Finally, the communication plan should be drafted. I love to include a few creative touches here. Things like an executive summary, which acts as a TLDR, or too long, didn't read, Cliff's Note version to keep execs informed and speaking the same language. Another thing I like to include in the communication plan is sort of a staff teaser leading up to the training event. It's like the trailer for the movie. It explains what's coming their way and why they should be excited about learning it. Then we move to the implement phase. This is the go live. This is same as in the sales process. A customer's implementation experience can either be the launch pad for success or a pit of despair, highlighting the pain of change. So training should be engaging and help reps learn by doing. We follow a simple teach, show, do model to ensure that we have an element of engagement in every training session. And that can vary. It could be a breakout room discussion, or it could be role plays or Q&A. There's a variety of things depending on the topic. It's important that as new things are rolled out, old, out-of-date content is deprecated. This keeps trust levels high and mitigates risk of referencing old processes. Knowledge checks and certifications are also a great way to verify the learning objectives were achieved. You want to consider, do reps know and are they able to show, say, or do those desired actions as a result of the training? We'll talk more about how these activities are great leading indicators when we focus on evaluating success in a bit. And then finally, change management. Change management and reinforcement plans is like a nurture campaign for a current prospect in the funnel. So make sure that you stay relevant and top of mind by having this constant drip campaign of reinforcement. And this, again, could include a variety of things. So here are some options. It could be something like office hours or a specific team meeting follow-up. You could run a spiff or a contest. You could have the team submit call examples or score calls for feedback. You might want to host rep strategy or style workshops that actually help the reps take the training from theory and thought leadership to true application and how they'll use it on the job. Throughout this time, you should be measuring, iterating, and driving those activities that can improve the outcomes. Let's talk more about outcomes when we visit the evaluation stage. So in evaluate, let's relate this to the point in the sale where prospects use their ROI calculators to help demonstrate impact on the tangible, quantifiable evidence. So in this phase, I love to conduct an after-action review with the core team, gather feedback on the process itself and the outcomes to understand how do we improve it the next time. We revisit the baseline data and the desired outcomes and the actual outcomes. I also like to have my team members craft impact stories that highlight the purpose, process, and payoff to close out a program. These are like closed-won deal stories that we can share back with leaders in our enablement QBRs. When you think about it, your sales leaders and your execs, they're true storytellers. So let's give them some really memorable stories backed by data that help to celebrate these successes with all that were involved in the effort. We'll go into more detail on this slide in the next section, where I'll walk you through how to present my data strategy by using the Kirkpatrick model. But before I do that, I simply wanted to show a more accurate visual of the process than the original nice, neat, clean funnel that I showed for Addie. This really articulates the partnership throughout. So when we look at the screen here, you're able to see the analyze phase leads to design develop. And this is all done in a behind the scenes group, which is that core sponsor team. You then jump to implement. And within that, there's a variety of partnerships that are crucial to the success. So yes, you go live in the training and the reps understand the information, but we also have to create that safe space to practice and leave some time for coaching and reinforcement to actually work through the change curve and actually adopt this new strategy. Once that's done, then we'll evaluate, or throughout that process, we'll evaluate, and then we can understand, do we need to create any additional content to support? All right, so let's double tap and zoom into the evaluation stage, because I think this is where I find a lot of my industry peers seeking advice. And for those of you in enablement that came from a sales background and may have missed some of the instructional design best practices, this one is gold. The Kirkpatrick model is probably the best known model analyzing and evaluating results of training and educational programs. It's a classic. It was originally published in 1959, released again in Kirkpatrick's early 90s book, and I'm dusting it off the shelf and giving it a bit more of a makeover for how I use it specifically for sales enablement initiatives. I really want to create like a trail of breadcrumbs of leading and lagging indicators that tie enablement's efforts to the team's results. So we'll walk through each of these different phases, and I'll try and give you a really specific practical example that is associated with each one. Starting with the foundation. So the level 1 reaction phase is your standard post-training survey. You'll want to measure a few things: confidence in content, the trust in the facilitator, and the rep's motivation to apply what they learned. In this phase, I actually drive a lot of expectation of partnership with the sales managers. They are responsible for ensuring 100% completion of this survey so that we have really good actionable data. Another option that could be used is you might have a pre-training survey that goes out where you can actually have comparative data with this survey as well. Okay, I said I'd take us through a real example for each of these levels. So let's imagine that we just launched a discovery training for our account executives. In this case, here's a few things that I would report back onto my leadership team. First, and it's going to sound super simple, but the number of attendees. The reason for this is because you want to understand the reach of the knowledge transfer to determine if any additional sessions are required to reach the true intended target audience. So if you only had 50% participation, even if the scores in that survey are really high, you're still not reaching everyone that you needed to. The next is an NPS type of score. So having a standard score associated with each training will help you understand and compare key initiatives to help the enablement team build a strategy. Anecdotal feedback, manager discussions. So like, you don't want to just have the numbers there, but you want to hear from the team, how are they reacting? So I typically have my managers incorporate 3 questions in their next team meeting to keep the training top of mind. Things like, what were your key takeaways? Or, for discovery, it could be something like, what are your favorite prep strategies to generate your hypothesis? Once we've evaluated level 1, it's time to ensure that the knowledge transferred. So within this stage, this is where you create the practice opportunity. And this could come in a variety of ways, whether it's a knowledge check, like a black and white test, or a role play or certification if you're wanting to be more formal. So back to that discovery training example. Here's what I'd report back to the manager group upon completing the post-training certification. It could be the number of calls scored by team. That'll show us if we have any delinquent managers. That might be a leading indicator that they would be a detractor for the program. The next would be average score per team or department. Are some teams stronger than others? How do those scores per team match up to performance rankings? Are some managers easier graders than others? Maybe there's extra calibration required in order to make this consistent and successful. Next is average score per criteria. So if you were measuring 5 key indicators of success on a 5-point scale, you'd be able to see which skill sets require additional coaching. And through this process, you want to continuously surface examples. So I'd have managers be responsible for selecting a good example to share back with the group at large to help celebrate those wins and drive those right behaviors. Talk about a team sport. Enablement needs managers to inspect what they expect and drive those behaviors in the right direction. So it's important that you closely monitor the desired behavior change and regularly check in on progress. Back to that discovery example. If you have a revenue intelligence tool, you can look at conversation data. So using a tool like Gong or Chorus, that can help you identify if key talk tracks are being implemented, soft skill ratios like talk time or patient scores. There's a lot of really good intel in the conversation intelligence tools. Coaching scorecards and individual development plans could be another data point for you. Also, the operational rigor around desired inputs. So if you're having them do something new in the platform, you want to actually check and make sure that that behavior is occurring. And finally, for discovery in particular, you'd probably want to be looking at, are we multi-threading accounts? Are we having the depth of conversation with the right personas and the breadth of conversation with as many personas as we need to drive success? Finally, level 4 results. So this is where you revisit those baseline metrics that you initially established in the analyze phase, and you report on progress to goal. So when we think about this discovery example again, you're likely going to be reporting back on something like stage conversion rate. Were you able to improve the velocity and the percentage through the sales funnel? You'd also want to see average contract value. If you're doing better discovery, are you able to tie it to a higher investment value? And then finally, it could be something like changes to loss reasons for the stage, right? Are we improving based on our goals, whatever the intention of the training were in that category? This slide is just helpful because I know there's a lot of areas of gray between ops and enablement, and I thought it'd be helpful to define the partnership and the process. So you see that enablement is really geared towards the reaction, the learning, and the behavior, because most of that data can be pulled through our enablement tech stack. But it's important to have someone from ops or perhaps your business intelligence team advise on what's feasible to report and to plan an appropriate cadence for reporting back on the topic. So if we were revisiting that discovery training, for example, depending on the average deal cycle, we may have to measure for approximately 3 or more quarters to truly correlate the impact. And I think that's something that our teams often lose sight of, is the long tail end of these enablement initiatives. All right, so let's wrap this up. In this session, we covered how enablement is a strategic function and how acting as internal consultants to the business can really cause a great multiplier effect. We also spent time walking through 2 models to create repeatable processes for your team. So that was the ATD model, and we talked about a repeatable data model to set expectations for those priority initiatives and connect the dots of enablement's impact in the Kirkpatrick model. If you're still craving more on this topic, check out the article that I wrote for TD Magazine. It's called A Sales Enablement Blueprint for Success, and it goes into additional detail on the exact process that I follow with my teams. Thanks so much for your time today. I'd love to hear from you on what you felt was most valuable from this session. Feel free to connect with me on any of my personal platforms that are listed here.